everyone. Welcome to the EarthtonesGirl channel and the No Fear sock knitting class online. My name is Denise and this is class number 14. In this class today, we are going to learn how to knit an Afterthought heel with no waste yarn. So that means we will actually be cutting into the tube of our sock. I know that sounds very scary, like faint-worthy scary, but I promise to make it as simple, clean, and easy to follow as possible, and I will be doing it right along with you. So what we will actually be covering today is how to knit the Afterthought heel with no waste yarn, where to place that heel in the sock tube that you've created, setting up for the cut, actually cutting into that heel, where to place your markers so that your cut is perfect, adding depth to the heel, whether that means you have a slightly larger heel or you need extra depth for a high arch, weaving in our ends, weaving in the cut ends as we create the heel, as we knit the heel, as well as the yarn, the new color yarn that's added for the heel, and working the decreases. And then finally, how to Kitchener. The Kitchener stitch will not be an in-depth tutorial, just showing you the basics, just a very quick run through on how to do the Kitchener stitch once you are done. So grab your, if you are working on a sock and you'd like to do this along with me, that would be great. I do recommend watching the tutorial from start to finish first, and then working on your sock tube. You can knit a sample for yourself if you've got a sock ready to go, great. You can work a sample however you'd like to do it. So let's jump in and knit an Afterthought heel together. So here we have our sock ready for an Afterthought heel. The most important part at this point is deciding where you want to put the heel in. For this sock, I've knit 30 rounds on the cuff. Then I knit 60 rounds on the leg. I know that I want to now put my heel in right where these markers are. So what I've done is I've marked 3 very important places because those are going to be the key spots for avoiding holes and for marking exactly where you want to cut to insert the heel. So what I do is I don't rip out, and you'll understand what I mean in a minute. Once you've made the cut, you can rip all the way out to the edge. I don't do that. So I mark off the second stitch in from the edge on the right side and the second stitch in from the edge on the left side. And if you trace this down, this is the first stitch, this is the second stitch, and I mark that second stitch in. Then I will work my way across to the middle. This particular sock is 64 stitches, so 32 on each side. So you're not going to get an even, absolutely even dead center. But what I did is marked the 16th stitch. So there's 15 on this side. I marked number 16, and then there's 16 on this side. It's okay if you're off by 1 or 2. That doesn't matter. But these markers are very, very important. Now, if you have a stripe, how do you know exactly where to place the heel within a striping sequence? For this particular sock, there are, now if you look, the stripes are not completely even, okay? So it's really important to line all of this up properly. The majority of this stripe is 5 gray rounds. So I'm gonna do this with the needle because it's a little easier than seeing my finger. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I decided to have 2 gray stripes before I start the heel and 2 gray rounds after I start the heel. So because it's an odd number, I can pick the 3rd stitch. If it were an even number, so if I had only 4 stripes, I like to, it's personal preference, what I like to do is have 1 stripe above. I will pick up the 2nd round and then have 2 stripes below. For some reason, just aesthetically, I just think it looks neat to do it that way. And I have another sock here. Here is a sock where I did exactly that. Let's just move this for a moment. So here, if you can see, I inserted the heel. There's 1 round. There's 1 round below where I inserted the heel, If you look on this side, there are then 2 rounds above. Okay, just so you see what that would look like, because this 4 round in this particular round here was only 4 stripes. Okay, sometimes it's 4, sometimes it's 5. So that's what you do if it's an even number. I like to have 1 above, 2 below. If it's an odd number, 2 above, 2 below. So let's get back to our sock. So I've got my markers in place. Second stitch in, everything is marked. And what I've done here is I've put another marker through the right leg only of that middle stitch, and that is what I'm going to cut. Now, what I like to do, some people will knit all the way to the toe, finish their toe, graft their stitches, and they'll put their hand in this way into the sock. I feel like I have more control if I come in from the top. So I'll knit a little bit past these markers, put my hand in, and the reason my hand is there, it's a barrier between the front and back, or actually this would be the front, this is the back, because we're putting the heel in here, so that I don't accidentally cut too deep. It's just a little extra protection. It also gives me a little more control when I'm picking up the stitches. Okay, so now everything is prepped and ready to go. What you want to do is pick up the round of stitches above the marker and below the marker. So I've got my needles right here. Okay, my extra set of needles. If you don't have a spare set of needles, if you only have the set that you're working on, or like many of us, you have multiple socks going at once and you've run out of extra needles and don't want to order another pair, you can put these stitches on waste yarn and use the needles, use your actual working needles to work the heel. Once you've grafted the heel stitches, you can just slide the stitches back onto the main sock and continue, just to have another option. So what I'm going to do is take my first needle, and what you are doing here is picking up the right leg of each stitch working across. Now, if you notice, below and above the center stitch are 2 perfect rounds in gray and 2 more perfect rounds above that. If you look over here, because of the way the yarn is dyed, half of this, one portion of this round is blue. So please make sure that you've got the exact row that you're picking up. Make sure that these markers are all in a line, okay? Because you might accidentally, because you're only seeing 1 here, you may accidentally push it 1 above and then your count is off, all right? So let's start picking up our stitches. So here's the first stitch, and I'm going to go in here and just pick up the right leg. What this does is it positions the stitches in the correct order on the needle. Once I've picked that up, I can remove that marker because it does kind of get in the way. And I'm going to continue working across, picking up. Oops, doesn't want to behave. Hang on. Working across and picking up just the right leg of each stitch. Okay, can you see? And I'm just doing it very gently, very carefully. Just slide the tip of my needle in, and I'm going to work my way across. Okay, I meet up with this stitch. All right, that's my center. Oops. You know what? Made a mistake. For those of you that are like, no, you got to go 1 above. Okay, so I'm actually going to go up here and work my way across. All right, so there. And you know what? Sometimes I like to leave these mistakes or these little errors in my videos. A, to show that everyone can make a mistake. And B, it helps you, if you've made the mistake, now you can see how to fix it. Okay? So let's keep going. So now I'm working into the 4th round. So this is going to be the 4th round. That's the 5th in the gray, and I'm going to keep working across. There we go. And you can pull the stitches apart a little bit. You're not creating any holes or anything. It just helps you see exactly where you are. So I'm going to do this. Now, if you've been watching my tutorials for a while, you know that I like to do things in real time, which means I like to do things with you so you can see the entire process. Some people may find this a little tedious. If you do, please feel free to fast forward. For those of you that want to do this with me, we can do this right. There we go. That's a little more clear. It was a little blurry before. I apologize. We're just going to work our way across. All right. So far, I have 2, 4, 6, 8, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22, 24, 26, 28, 29 stitches. Here is 30, 31, and 32. And I'm just going to take this marker out. So now I've picked up a full or half a round of my stitches all through the right leg. Here is this stitch waiting to be snipped, but you've anchored and secured all of the stitches above. So we're going to do that again right below, okay? And then I will meet you right back. So all of the stitches above and below the center stitch have now been picked up, and I have 2 sets of needles going at once. Up until now, I have been pulling from the outside of my ball in order to knit my sock. So what I'm going to do now is start pulling from the center of the ball in order to work the Afterthought heel, because I'm using the same yarn. And yes, that's another reason some people like to finish the sock and then they can continue from the outside. If you're a little bit more daring, all you have to do is wrap this up. I will put a little scrunchie. It's a little bright, it's my daughter's. I will put a little scrunchie around here just so this doesn't continue to unravel or get into my way. And I will start pulling from the center, okay? Now, let's get ready. This is the scary part. And these little scissors were given to me by a friend. They were a gift, but you can purchase them on Amazon, and I will put a link in the description box under this video for you, okay? But the point is you want a very, very sharp, very pointy pair of scissors in order to snip. The larger the needle, the larger the scissors, the harder it's going to be to get into that very, very tiny stitch. So you really want something a little bit smaller. So here we go. Let's do the scary part. So once again, I have checked that I've picked up the right round all the way across, underneath my mark stitch, and all the way across above my mark stitch. Here it is waiting for me to snip it. I will put my hand down inside so you can see where my fingers are. My hand is right there as the barrier. I will take my scissors and I will, so my needle, my scissor is now inside that stitch and I'm going to snip it. Okay, I heard a couple of thumps. I know some of you just hit the floor. It's okay. You will be fine. Everything will be okay. The reason you put the needle above and below is so that this doesn't start to uncontrollably unravel. And then it's extremely difficult to pick these stitches up if you don't put the needles in ahead of time. Okay, so make sure that that happens. So what you want to do now, you're going to have 2 strands. So you're going to pull this apart a little bit. You have 2 strands and you're now going to start pulling that thread that you cut and unraveling your way across. Just like that. There is no rush. There is no race, as I say all the time. Just take your time. Now, as you can see, I'm snagged there a little bit. It's okay to just give a little pull. And you're just going to continue working your way across and unraveling. And you're also going to do the same thing. There's that strand waiting for me on the other side. I'm going to start pulling apart and doing the same thing on the other side. And I have now successfully cut an opening into my sock in order to insert an Afterthought heel. So we're going to keep unraveling. All right, and these are going to become our working stitches. So I'm going to keep working to the end. We're doing this together because this is the part. Now the reason I marked the end stitches is it's just a little easier to see where I'm going, but I want to leave these last two stitches, the last two in here, intact. I'm not going to pull this out. I'm not going to unravel and pull this thread out all the way to the end. I'm going to go only to the third stitch in. So these last two stitches are going to stay intact. So let's see what I mean, and let's see what that looks like. So I'm going to continue to unravel. And it doesn't matter if the thread starts to do that, because you're going to weave this in as you are working the heel. Let's just give that a little tug, give yourself some space, and just keep unraveling. Okay. How are we doing so far? Is everybody with me? Okay. Again, nice and easy. Take your time. And you're going to work your way across. Now, here I am. There's 2 stitches left. There's 3 stitches left. I want to unravel this third stitch and leave these 2 intact. So I'm going to pull the left leg out. And then I'm going to pull the right leg out. And this is going to stay there, okay? That I'm actually just going to tuck that in for a moment just to get it out of my way. There we go. And that's as far as I'm going to unravel. I'm going to leave it right there. And now I'm going to continue and do the same thing on the other side, and I'll meet you back in just a moment. So the space has now been created, and I'm ready to start knitting and working into these now live stitches. Okay, you can see how neat that is on the ends. Again, the last 2 stitches are intact, and there we go. So now I'm not interested in these top needles. They're just going to hang out. I'm interested in these needles. If you are working, I am using 2 circular needles. If you are using magic loop, this technique can be applied the same way. Okay, you're just going to position your needles, and you would have a loop on one end. You'd have your loop on this side if you were doing magic loop, and your working needles on this side. So here we go. For 2 circulars, I then have 2 ends on either side. So I am ready to start picking up. Now this is the magic part. You want to knit into these 2 stitches that have not been unraveled. What that does, it eliminates the possibility of a hole on the side. Okay, there's a much larger space. Let me pull this back out so you can see. If I were to have unraveled all the way to the end, the possibility of a hole there is much, much greater. Okay, you've got this big gaping space. So I don't go all the way to the end. Again, this method is not mine. The first person I saw do this was Kirby Werby, who learned it from Kat Bordy. Okay, I'm just showing you how I do it. So I've got my needle in place. I will grab the other end. Make sure you grab the correct end, 2 circular knitters. I will go into my first stitch. I have got my yarn in place. And if you want these to match, just measure off the same distance. So here's the edge of my yarn. Here's my ball or my cake. Here's the edge. I'm just going to give myself an approximate. I'm going to give myself maybe that much distance. And I'm going to start and make my loop right there. All right, that way when I do the second sock, everything matches. And here is my tail. If I don't feel like that's long enough, you can just pull a little bit more. All right, but you've got an eyeball. That's approximately 3 inches. You really don't need much more than that. If you'd like to pull out more, just make sure you match it when you do the second sock. So I have now gone into my first stitch. I'm going to go into my second. And I now have 3 ends that I need to weave in. This one that's coming from the ball. I have the tail end that I'm going to unraveled, and then I have my other one. So let's push this a little off camera for a moment, and let's continue to go. Now this is how I weave my ends in as I go. I'm going to go into the third stitch. Okay, grab my end. And it looks like there's a lot going on, but just again, take your time. There is no rush. Here is that stitch. I'm going to start weaving in that end. As I go. So I'm doing an over-under motion. Okay, so it's over. Actually, it was under and then over. I do have a full tutorial on how to weave in the ends, so I will link to that down below. But now everything is secure. That end that I snipped is secure, and I can tuck that inside. One less thing to do later. Now what we're doing here, and I'm going to talk about adding length or depth to the heel in just a moment. Right now, you just want to focus on putting in that first round and picking up all of these stitches or working into these stitches. So I'm just going to knit across. There we go. Just knitting. And sometimes if you pull from the center, you'll get a little yarn barf like this. Just unravel it, keep pulling, and you can just keep going. Okay. That blue, remember, is from continuing the rest of the sock. So just ignore the blue for now. Or whatever color you are working on. So I'm just going to work across. Now, I went a little too far, so I'm just going to tink back. So here I am, 2, 4, 6, 8, 9 stitches before the end. And now I want to weave in this second strand. This was the other side that I had unraveled. So I'm going to pull that in between. Again, I have a tutorial on how to weave in these ends. You would do it the same way, okay? Meaning if you're just weaving in regular ends, if you change colors, you're doing the same thing that you are here. Excuse me, weaving in the ends of the ball as you go. So I'm going to under and over, under, whoops, hello, there we go, and over. And because it's gray on gray, it's kind of hard to see, but I'm locking these stitches in on the inside of the sock. It doesn't matter what you end with, an under or an over. It's just to get everything secure. Here we are at the last 2 stitches. So I'm going to go into that second to last. Whoops. Okay, so that I didn't have to wrap again, just go over. And here's the last. And they're a little snug. There you go. Now, I'm ready to go on to the other side. So what I want to do is just give this a little tug, and I am secure. Okay, I'm going to pull this needle out, turn my work. Here we go. And I'm going to continue. Whoops, grab the wrong end. There we go. Sometimes it helps if you knit a little bit more distance so that that doesn't help and you grab, that doesn't happen and you grab the wrong end. So I'm just going to tuck that like that. There's a lot of needles, so just make sure you grab the correct end. And I'm just going to keep, you don't have any ends to weave in on this side, so you just go in to the first stitch, that first unraveled stitch, and I'm just going to keep knitting. Give a little tug. And I always like to push my needle under the other just to avoid a ladder. There we go. See how that's tucked under there? And I'm just going to keep working across. I have not done any decreases yet. I'm just working across this first round of stitches. Oops, pull a little bit more yarn out. And I'm going to keep going. All right, so we would have completed this first round. Now, don't forget, you've got one more end to weave in. This is the end from the center of the ball where we started working the heel. So you want to stop again about 9 stitches before the end. You can do a few less, but I wouldn't do less than 5, and I probably wouldn't do more than 10, especially if it's a different color. Right now I have gray on gray, but if it's a different, oops, almost split. If it's a different color, depending on how high the contrast, you may see it. So you definitely want to be a little more conservative, especially if they're a different color. So here I am, 2, 4, 6, 8. Unravel 1 just to be consistent. And I'm going to pull that strand, same thing, right in between the 2. Tuck my finger in. There's just enough room. If that feels a little too tight for you, again, you can make that a little longer. And I'm just going to weave my end in. There we go. I'm almost finished. Those last 2 stitches, I'm just working over. And there you have it. So I'm going to pull this out, give this a little tug, close that space, give it another little tug, and I am now ready to continue. Now, you can go here and just pull the strand from the front to the back or to the inside and tuck it down inside. And you can do the same thing here and just tuck them all in. So everything is now neat, tidy. There are no holes on the sides. I have picked all of my stitches up, and I'm going to now start working some plain rounds in order to add a little bit of depth. Many people, the main complaint with the heel is pulling. Let me grab my other sock. Is pulling across the instep, okay, which is right here on your sock. Here's your heel, here's your instep. People tend to complain if they have a high arch or just the top of their foot is just a little larger or longer. This part across the top of the sock will pull. In order to avoid that and to add a little depth, because this may not be long enough, even if you have a larger heel, or again, to avoid the pulling on the instep, you want to add a few plain rounds before you start the decreases. For this particular sock, I added 2 or 3 rounds before starting my decreases. And the decreases are worked as for a wedge toe, which means you're going to work a plain round, a decrease round, a plain round, a decrease round, until you get down to the number of stitches you want left here. I usually knit down or decrease down to 10 stitches on each needle or 20 total, and then I will graft. So you want to work, in order to add some depth and to avoid stretching on the instep, you want to knit a few plain rounds before you start your decreases, okay? So I'm going to knit a few more rounds and then we'll start working our decreases together. So here we are. I have now completed 2 additional rounds after that first pickup, quote unquote, pickup round, because you're not quite picking stitches up. And now I am ready to do my decreases. So and I wanted to show you how this would look if you were a little further away. So the needles, the 2 sets of needles are not so close together. So let me just pause and show you what that would look like. And in this case, I'm actually using 2 balls this time, but this is how it looks. If I open this all the way up, as you see, I've got a little bit more depth here on the foot. That folds back a lot neater. And now I'm working from this ball. This one just gets put to the side. This ball I'm now working with, and it's just a little bit easier. As you can see, there's just more distance between the working needle and the needle that's part of the foot. So you do, again, if this is a little easier and looks a little less confusing to just knit a little further, you still have that space to put your hand inside and do everything that we did at the beginning. Okay, so I just wanted you to see that. So let's move that out of the way, move our demo sock back into place. So now you are going, so our ends have been, we've decided on our spot, we've picked up our stitches above and below the marked stitch. We have clipped in, we have created the space, we have worked our first pickup round and 2 additional to add depth. Now, I know people are gonna ask the question, how many rounds do you need in order to get the depth that you need? That has to be a bit of trial and error. I usually start with 3 plain rounds, and you can go on from there. You may only need 3. You don't need as many as you think you need. So 3 to 5 tends to be enough to give you just that little bit of give, that little extra space and give across the instep to make this heel really, really comfortable. So work anywhere within that range of 3 to 5 plain rounds and then start your decreases. And again, that is not an absolute. You may need a little bit more, but at least you have a starting point to work with. Okay, so now we are going to do these decreases the same way that we would for a wedge toe. So I like to knit 1 stitch plain, and then I will do, now this is the decrease that I was talking about. I'm not going to fully explain it right now. I will do that in a separate video. But this particular decrease I learned from Patty Lyons. And there you have it. So that is a left-leaning decrease. I always give an extra tug. Always, always, always tug on the 2nd to 3rd stitch when you are starting a round because it closes any potential gaps on the edges. And then I will knit across. We'll do this together. And then I will meet you at the end when all of my decreases are complete. So I'm just working across. And again, take your time. Let me slow down a little bit. I'm saying taking your time. I'm saying take your time and my hands are flying. So let's just slow down. So I am now 3 stitches before the end. I'm going to knit 2 together, which is a right-leaning decrease. And knit 1. Pull my needle out, I'm going to turn, and I'm going to do that again on the other side. Regular decreases. If you have knit, oops, that doesn't need to be there. If you have knit decreases before, this should look familiar. So again, I'm going to knit that first one. I'm going to do what I'm calling Patty Lyons left-leaning decrease. Come through, it is leaning to the left. Give it a little extra tug and work my way across. I will also link under this tutorial a link to Patty Lyons' tutorial for that decrease, okay? Again, that is not mine either. I learned that from Patty Lyons, who also has a really fantastic book, which I will also link to down below, but the name of the book is escaping me right now. But I have it on my shelf. I just can't think of the name, but it's a really, really great resource. And not too big and intimidating, which is really, in terms of size, which is really great. So, but it is chock full of information. So anyway, here I am now at the other side. I have my 3 stitches. I will do a right-leaning decrease, knit 2 together, knit the last, and turn. And now, here are my decreases. Look at how clean and beautiful. You almost can't even see it. It's so gorgeous. The same way the stitch tucks, when you do a right-leaning, how that stitch tucks underneath, it does the same thing on this side. It's just so clean and beautiful. So yes, I get that excited over knitting stuff. So now I'm just going to work a plain round, just knitting all of my stitches, and then another decrease round and a plain round and a decrease round. So I will see you at the halfway point, and then we will finish up. So here we are, almost to the halfway point in our heel, and look at that. Doesn't that look amazing? There we go. So these are the decreases. That's what they look like up close. Here are the left leaning decreases. Here are the right leaning. Oh, look at how clean that is. And let's take a peek at our intersections. So here we are with no holes. Okay, and you can adjust. If you notice that there's any tugging, you can adjust that by just giving a little extra stretch, or either it may need a little more slack or it may need to be tweaked and pulled a little bit. You can figure that out then as you go. I think once I let that go, that looks really, really good. No holes. And on the other side, here we are on the other side. Let's open that up, and no holes. Nice and clean. Everything is smooth. Oh, that looks fantastic. So let's finish decreasing. Okay, again, alternating between a decrease round and knitting a plain round, and then we will meet back up and Kitchener our heel closed. So our heel is done. Woohoo! Look at that. As I said, no holes on the sides. We have decreased down to 20 stitches, 10 on each needle. Again, if you were doing this via magic loop, it would be the same thing. You would have the looped end of your needle here. You would have the points of your needles here. So now we are going to Kitchener stitch this closed. So I think the rule of thumb, as I've heard other people say, is to measure off about 3 times the width of the stitches. I kind of eyeball it and think, all right, well, that's probably enough, and just snap my yarn. So I don't put that much thought into that. So here we are going to thread the needle, and how I thread my tapestry needle, I'm sure many of you do the same. I just wrap it around the needle, take it off, and then just slide it right through. Okay, of course that didn't work because I'm looking at it through the camera. So you're going to just wrap it around, slide it through, and you've threaded your needle and you're ready to go. So now I have a full tutorial here on my channel with detailed explanation on how to do the Kitchener stitch. So I'm just going to do it here with very little explanation. If you'd like a full tutorial, I will link to that in the show notes down below as well. So now we are going to close up the back end of our heel. So I'm going to slide my needle in, and I do this in 2 steps, 2 moves instead of 4, which is a little more customary for a Kitchener. You are doing the same thing, I'm just eliminating a step. So we'll just pull through here. Again, I always stay under. The trick to a Kitchener stitch is staying under the needles. All of the sewing is happening under the needle. So I'm just working right underneath here. And ultimately a Kitchener stitch is knitting in a row, or not knitting, sewing in a row of knit stitches. That is ultimately what you're doing. You're weaving these together, and as a result, you are creating a sewn set of knit stitches. That is how I was taught. So just make sure nothing springs back up. As you can see, we are closing up here. And I think the Kitchener stitch takes a little bit of practice to get the tension just right. So don't beat yourself up if it's a little bit off. But we're almost there. Oops, now this can happen and you'll think you have an extra stitch. It's just a little loop. Okay, the yarn just flipped up there. There we go. And we are closing. As you can see, we are weaving the front to the back, okay, and making it look completely seamless. Okay, so we don't have much to go, so we may as well do it together. Let's close up this heel in real time, everybody. Always just take a moment, double check your stitches. Stitch count still matching on both sides. There we go, almost done. And as I say frequently in my tutorials, it's not a race. It's no competition. Just take your time and you will get it done. Okay, almost there. And the little edge stitches can feel a little fiddly. Again, take your time. So I have 2 stitches left on each needle. Okay. There we go. And here are the last 2 stitches. So you just treat those as if you just had the one. So I'm going to knit, slip off, and purl, slip off. And there we go. So now we have an extra set of needles to cast on more socks. So let's just rest those off to the side. And how I finish off actually, is, do you see that little hole right here? There's this tiny little space right under the stitches, the last 2 stitches you wove together. I usually go right into that hole, pull my yarn through, and when I give a little tug and a little tweak and a little pull, the dog ears that can happen, those little flappy ends, disappear. I don't have any ends hanging, and my heel is complete. And there you go. Turn it on the wrong side. You will weave your end in, which I won't actually do right now. Again, full tutorial will be linked down below. I'm just going to tuck this in so you can see it. And our heel, hole free, beautiful Afterthought heel with that striking, amazing bullseye effect is now complete. Here is my other sock that I was using. And as you can see, oh, thing of beauty. There you have it. Your Afterthought heel is complete. And you can now remove the little scrunchie from the bottom of your ball and continue knitting down the foot of your sock. Happy sock knitting, everybody. Thank you so much for watching. And there you have it. An Afterthought heel knit with no waste yarn. You survived. Thank you so much for joining me for today's tutorial. I hope that you've enjoyed it. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the comment section below this video. There will also be links to some things that were mentioned in the tutorial in the description box down below. So again, hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you again very soon. Thank you, everyone.